Welcome to Women's Wealth and Wellness Unleashed. I'm Lori Falk, and together with my three powerhouse co-hosts and a slew of thought leaders and luminaries, we're bringing you a scintillating talk show style podcast that will disrupt the worlds of wealth and wellness as we know them today. We invite you to go on this journey with us as we offer you a paradigm shift that empowers you to change your approach to these key areas of your life. Join us and discover the truth that the future of wealth and wellness begins with you.
Hello and welcome to another amazing episode of Women's Wealth and Wellness Unleashed. My name is Jenny Dangerfield and I'm here with my amazing co-hosts, and we are going to bring you some really exciting information today, as usual. I think it's always exciting, but I did want to delve a little bit deeper into, maybe I'll start out with a question. Have you ever thought about how you can sense when someone is staring at you from across the room? Or maybe when you're thinking about someone, then all of a sudden the phone rings. So I think that maybe we should get into this a little bit deeper and talk about some mind-bending science that some of us call woo-woo, but is really just quantum. It's quantum.
We used to call it woo-woo, Jenny. Come
We
on.
used to call it woo-woo. It did used to be called woo-woo. It was kind of taboo to talk about. No one really believed it. But, these are really these unseen connections, right? So I'm setting the stage a little bit to talk about the science of quantum entanglement. Okay, just, a little bit of a definition, and you can look this up yourselves, but quantum entanglement is basically when two particles become linked, no matter how far apart they are. All right, so if one changes, then the other reacts instantly. Sometimes we kind of think of this as like twinning, right? As that twin syndrome. If you have twins and they're, across the globe from each other, and something happens to one, then the other can feel it. This is kind of something that we understand to be a connection. Well, our bodies and our thoughts and our emotions operate in this energy field and in this same way. And so we become interconnected, just like entangled particles. And so I also think that we're going to get into today a little bit more about remote scanning and how we tap into energy fields. And that leads into a really cool subject of remote healing, and kind of like sending frequencies like a radio station, right? So tapping into energy fields, and then remote healing using coherence or harmonizing frequencies to strengthen our health, while, disharmony creates stress and disease. So I think this is going to be a really fun topic today. What do you think, ladies?
I think it's way fun. And, Jenny, when you were talking about entanglement, there was an image that came up for me that helped me understand this better. So I'm just going to throw it out there in case it's helpful to anybody else. I remember when I saw the movie Avatar, and what I've learned about trees is that trees are very entangled and communicate with each other below the ground through their root system in ways that we can't see. So all we get to see is the trees above ground, and they look separated from each other the same way that we as humans look separated from each other. But we're linked, in a realm that isn't visible to the naked eye necessarily. And those images in Avatar were like that, that those connections existed, but not in the way that we're used to perceiving them. So I think that's a way maybe to start getting over this woo-woo thing, is to realize that there's things that exist and that can be measured that weren't available to the naked eye, that we now have the ability to include in our perception.
Well, I think that, this is something that has been talked about for a very long time. Even Einstein was playing with these ideas. It was very, very still foreign to him. You know, he was still very much traditional physics, and wasn't really looking at things in a quantum, like time and space type of way. But he knew, and what he said, I believe, was, there were unmeasurable things that he couldn't explain, or that could not be explained. But what we know now is that they very much can be explained, and it is repeated over and over. And so, we'll also talk about a little bit about science and how this has happened and been studied even by our military and our government since the early 20s, ramped up a little bit in the 60s, but we'll get into that a little bit later. I know Lori loves this topic.
No, the weirder it gets, the more I love it, right? You guys know me only too well. But the fact of the matter is that science is only right until it's disproved and something else is proved. So whatever the current science is, I mean, if you think back 100 years ago and look at how much the scientific beliefs have changed over that 100-year period of time, over the century, it's just not the same. The science that we had 100 years ago is not the same science that we have today. The accepted science, the accepted truth at the moment is only as good as it is until it's proved otherwise. And all the mystics and scientists, Greg Braden, Joe Dispenza, Bruce Lipton, they all talk about that. And they also say that spirituality is the new science. Bruce Lipton used to be an atheist until he woke up one day and he looked at all he was studying and all he was seeing, and he said, this is not all there is. It's impossible. It's impossible. And they're all of the ilk that spirituality is the new science. It really is. Because right? It's all entangled. That's the key. It's all entangled. And when you really think about it, if everything is energy, then everything has to be entangled.
Yeah. Can I fess up as the woo adjacent person here? Because because as you know, you're now veering into an area where I kind of start squirming in my seat a little bit, going, this all sounds a little bit strange to me. But I have, as you know, have become a lot more curious and a little bit more aware that the world as I thought it, as I know it, is possibly not all there is. So I think some of the things you're referring to might be, for example, seeing a white feather, after a loved one has passed, or on the anniversary of a loved one passing, or in the UK, we very much believe robins in the garden are symbolic of someone coming back to you who has passed. For me, seeing 1111, wherever I go these days, it's become laughable in our family how often I look up and, oh my God, it's 11:11, or take a photograph. Oh my God, I took that at 11:11. But I think you're going to see me probably mostly quiet during this episode because I'm very much in learning mode, because a lot of this remote healing and all of that is something I've not come across before. So I just wanted to kind of say why I'm probably going to be more of an observer in this episode and really keen to hear everyone's take on this, because I don't have anything particularly valuable to add to the conversation.
Well, then you should ask questions, because our audience probably has questions. So your asking of the questions will get them the answers that they're looking for.
I'd also like to say for the audience as well, as you're listening, maybe let's try a little experiment of our own, because I think, the practice of this kind of helps us to understand it a little bit better. Like I said when I asked the question, have you ever wondered why you can feel someone staring at you? or if you think of someone and all of a sudden the phone rings and it's them. So why don't you try that right now? Start thinking of someone that, maybe you want to recommend this podcast to because it is just impacting your life so much. And, think about that person, say a name out loud in your head or out loud in your car, wherever you're listening, and, and then just kind of forget about it a little bit. All right. And let's just do an experiment and see how that actually works in our everyday life. Because I'm telling you, they will call or something will show up that even more reminds you of that person. It does work. And I want to just talk a little bit more about quantum entanglement because it is a state of polarization, let's say. It's a particle state, right? And so when a certain state affects another state, we call that complementary. And so this happens when we have when we are in communication with other people in, how do I say this?
Resonance.
Resonance. Thank you. That's the word I was looking for.
I
Okay.
knew it.
Our bodies, you knew it. Our bodies,
Some connection.
right?
Entangled.
We emit an energetic blueprint. Okay. And so this is something that when you walk into a room and everyone looks at you, you know that you are vibrant and you feel really good. You are putting out this amazing energy into the room. Just like if someone walks into the room and you immediately get a big, negative feeling, and they probably are putting out some negative energy that you don't want to be a part of. So you stay away from that person. So we're all putting out these energetic blueprints all the time. All right. So something that I think is really cool today, because based on science and how far we've come, we have these amazing devices now that we can actually read this energetic blueprints before we can read the physical connection that it has to the body. All right. So I know Susan, and I think both Susan and Lori are wearing their Healy device today. I use another device called BioWell. There's a lot of biofeedback devices. And these are able to tap into this energy field and read this connection that we have and kind of interpret this data, kind of like a Wi-Fi signal. All right. And sometimes all we need is to connect the right device to the right people. We just need the right router, a healer or device, right? It doesn't necessarily have to be a device. People can do this too. People do remote scanning all the time. So, and this is how people, interpret data. I'm not sure if you've heard of Reiki, but that's something to look into. This is kind of how people, I don't know too much about Reiki, so I don't want to give you the wrong information. Someone else can talk a little bit about that.
But it is energy healing.
Yes.
Which I think, was what you were getting at. And there's a lot of research behind it. And speaking of which, I wanted to mention for those of you that are interested in a better understanding of what we're describing as the science, that when I was first introduced to these concepts was probably about 20 years ago, almost. And there was a movie that came out that's still available that I want to recommend with background here, called What the Bleep Do We Know? And there was a sequel called Down the Rabbit Hole, where I remember there were scientific experiments that were conducted where they demonstrated that electrons behave differently if they knew they were being observed. So there's intelligence out there, below the surface, as it were, that's always been operating. And those movies were really cool and interesting. We can have the details in the show notes, but I think if this is new to anybody and they want to have a better, understanding of what we're describing as the science, that would be a really good way to do it. And I also wanted to mention, because Lori was talking about the spiritual dimension. And I remember myself looking around at one point at the world and about what science was discovering, and realizing that something put all of this in motion. I mean, quantum physics, which is beyond the capability of most human brains, actually exists. These formulas and structures of the universe. How did they get there? I mean, it just seems logical to me. There must be a consciousness and an intelligence that was capable of putting all of this in motion, or where the heck did it come from? And I saw, or someone told me about a meme recently that I thought was really adorable for those of us that are tuned into this. And it said that synchronicities and coincidences, Jenny, like what you were talking about, are really God's way of trying to remain anonymous. And I thought that was an adorable way to think about it. Because that entanglement, I'm going to say something else that's a little bit amusing. It has gotten so good, Jenny, that when I think of something, it's not just that the people call these days, but I get something on my Facebook feed within a day these days that seems to be corresponding to the things I'm thinking about, and not even just what I'm saying. So I don't know. I don't want to travel that far down that rabbit hole.
That is a rabbit hole. And that's actually on the technological side, this is where we're going into this kind of quantum realm. And there's quantum technologies out here that have been happening since the 60s that we are just now becoming privy to. But this technology is not new. What you're saying, like your phone listening to you, that is wild.
But it's now hearing things that I haven't even said.
Yeah.
And I've only noticed this recently, but it's happened a couple of times in the past few weeks. It's me.
Right. Because I've noticed that too, because there's things that, I mean, I get that it hears you when you're verbalizing something, right? I mean, we're at that point. And
iPhones are always listening. Yeah.
Right. And often if I'm going to say something that is very, very disruptive, even more disruptive than the stuff we talk about here, I shut my phone off. What I forget about is that the computer's still on.
So, Leslie, this is where we say to you, hold on to your chakras.
So a question then is, why, if these conversations and this science technologies have been around since the 1960s, is the conversation still so polarizing in terms of people? If you'd asked me 18 months ago, I would have gone, my God, that is far, far too woo-woo for me. Whereas now I kind of go, I'm woo adjacent. You know, I'm prepared to consider that there are things beyond my knowledge because I haven't entertained them as a possibility, because I haven't known that they're a possibility. So maybe go into some of the things that you ladies know about in terms of remote healing, for example, to give the listeners a hint of why I'm kind of a little bit, ooh, this all sounds a little bit strange, but to you guys, it is something that you wholeheartedly believe in and have seen the evidence of.
Okay, I have a concrete answer. So we keep talking about these little Healy devices. Now you see this has wires connected to it, and I have a bracelet, and it's sending microcurrent frequencies into the meridian points around my wrist. All right, so that's one of the ways this works. It also works with a coil that sends scalar waves around your body. In
Tesla coil, specifically. Everybody's heard of Tesla.
Right.
Inspired, yeah.
Right. So in a 6-foot radius. So, and that's what the company says is how one of the apps works. I, on the other hand, because I am a Reiki master, said that if Reiki works long distance, this works long distance. And so I tested it out early on when the device first came to the US, and I had clients all over the country. So I had one woman in particular out in California, and she was almost as woo adjacent as you, Leslie.
I love that expression.
I know. And I was introducing her to the Healy, and she said, well, will you do a session on me? And I said, sure. So I did a scan. I did the resonance analysis scan to find out where which programs would be the best for her. And then I flipped over to the app that you're supposed to be connected or using the Tesla coil. And I looked at the Healy and I said, send these frequencies to Beverly in Los Angeles. And they took the Healy and they set it on the table away from me. And I let the program run. And she called me the next day and said, wow, that was amazing. Can we do it again? And I did it one more time. And after I did it twice, she called me and she purchased a $2,500 Healy from me because it worked.
And what worked for her? What happened to her?
So the frequencies were literally going to her. So when you think of, all right, as a Reiki practitioner, the Reiki energy is coming through you. But when you're doing it long distance, you have to, as the practitioner, hold such a strong intention, because normally Reiki is done where, well, it's hard to show. If you're on YouTube, you can see this. So if the Reiki is coming out of my top hand, going into my lower hand, it's usually about that far from the body. But when you're doing long distance Reiki, it's all through the power of intention. And I said, if I can send my physical energy through the power of intention, I can certainly send energy in the form of a frequency device, long distance. And obviously it had enough of an impact that she didn't even bat an eye. She just bought it after 2 sessions.
Well, you know, there's an example that was offered by Dr. Carolyn McMakin, who wrote an amazing book called The Resonance Effect. And Jenny, that's why I said that word. I know you love that word. I know you love that book. I know you love Carolyn. And she was trying to explain this in terms that most of us could understand. And she offered an example that I thought was one of the best. So I share that one too. She said, many of us are old enough to remember when opening our cars required a physical key. Because in 3D, we used to need a physical key to put in the lock to unlock it for the door to open.
Right.
But for decades now, most of us have a key fob that all you have to do is click. And that key fob that we use all the time without questioning works on the basis of frequency. There's a frequency that is aligned and established between my key fob and my key and my car. So I don't have to go out in the rain and, you know, physically find my car in the parking lot and put the physical key in to open the door. I can click from wherever I am. And that door is going to unlock because it's a frequency that's aligned with my key fob, and the light will, you know, light up and I can find my car and, you know, not get so wet. So we're already using these things in our lives really without questioning them. And Jenny, I love the fact that you've been putting some questions out to the audience today, because that is way more engaging. But have any of you actually thought about your key fob and how that works? No. We just know that we're no longer limited to making things happen in our 3D physical world, because we've harnessed technology that makes a lot of other things easier. I mean, to me, that's a hack. You know, we've been talking about hacks, things that make life easier. A key fob is a fabulous hack.
And now you don't even have to push the button. If you're standing next to the car and you've got the fob in your purse,
it just opens.
It just
because
opens.
yeah. So we've all had that experience. Leslie, does that help make some sense of this?
Yeah,
I thought that was one of the best examples, because it's already available to us.
But absolutely. But also, we've got a closer example than that, and it's just dawned on me. You know, 2 of you are in Florida, 1 of you is in Wisconsin, I'm in UK, and we're seeing each other on a screen. Can you imagine 300-400 years ago saying that we could have these conversations by being completely oceans apart from each other?
Within recent decades.
Yeah.
I don't even need to go back hundreds of years.
No, exactly. Absolutely. Absolutely. And the fact that we can not physically be in the same room, but actually be emotionally connected, because the stuff that we share off screen in particular goes to show that is, and that's probably just landed for me now, that just because we don't understand something doesn't, because I have no idea how this works at all, but it doesn't mean it's not real. And I think that has just your key fob example and making the connection, it has just made me realize very often we feel threatened when we don't understand something, therefore we deny its existence because it doesn't make sense. But actually, we've become very, very accepting of being on a plane. How the hell does a plane stay in the sky? So I'm starting to get it a lot more now. So I need to have obviously more of these conversations with you because I'm kind of being brought along to the party.
Well, I love what you said, because Wi-Fi,
Yeah.
I mean, we all use it
Yeah.
without questioning. And yet we think, it's a paradigm
Great
shift.
point.
Lori, when you were speaking a little earlier about something's true until something else becomes true, that's sort of the definition of a paradigm shift. And we're
Right.
in that now, partly because there is so much more science available, partly because, the internet has made this so accessible. I mean, people can be researching what we're talking about and, finding these things out for themselves, very easily these days. Um, and also a lot of old things aren't working. We're in the wellness realm, and I have an amazing story about this remote. When my mom was alive, I used to do scans and send her frequencies all the time when I was not physically with her. And I remember one day doing a scan, and it came up pretty high for pain. So I sent her some pain frequencies, and then I called her to say, "Hi, how are you doing?" And she said, "Susan, it's so weird. I was having a lot of pain in my knee, and then 10 minutes ago, it just went away." And I said, "Yeah, I just sent you some frequencies." So, some of that was empirical, because it actually happened that way. And I'm not going to say that I take these things for granted, but they've become so familiar to me, Leslie,
Right.
Yeah.
in the way I think about them. And I hope this conversation, produces that kind of aha for others, because it isn't new anymore, actually. It's our acceptance and finding ways to explain it to our left brain sometimes, things that we already know, are true. And I know we wanted to take this a little bit deeper today. And Lori, I'm going to hand this back to you, because we have a really exciting guest that we're going to be introducing next week that you've invited. And her work is so cutting edge that we realized we needed to provide the groundwork this week for what we're going to be sharing with you next week, because it would otherwise be just mind-blowing without a context. So if you could remind us and let our audience know what we have to look forward to. We're going to be taking this to a whole other level with Lisa.
Yeah, absolutely. It's interesting because when I met Lisa Schermerhorn just a month ago in DC, she was speaking at an inaugural leadership conference on crypto and health, of all, what interesting combination. So Make America Healthy Again, she was one of the speakers. And we were staying at the same Airbnb. And as soon as I got there and asked her about her speech, she was like, "Oh, let me show you, let me show you." And she took me back in her bedroom, and we were like standing around her computer and all getting really excited, because what she's doing is she's actually helping people who have been vaccinated to clean up their blood and remove any of the toxins from the vaccinations. And what she's doing is she's doing live blood analysis at the beginning before she works on anyone, and then she works on them, and a lot of it is long distance prayer work, intention work, if you will. She prays over them, and then a week or so later she does another live blood analysis, and it's like night and day. It looks like Dr. Emoto's work when you look at the ice cubes that have fear in, like intended upon them or written upon the test tube or whatever. And the ones that have love, the fear ones, are ugly and mucky and they look like mud and they're just disgusting. And the crystals, the ice crystals for love, are just so beautiful. That's the dramatic difference between the before and the after. And Leslie's still scowling. We mentioned this a couple of weeks ago, and Leslie goes, I just don't think I could ever have that done. And I am going to make a prediction. Within 6 months, Leslie Thomas, I believe you will have worked with Lisa or someone like Lisa to make sure that you're free of any toxins that you might have gotten during that time period. So it's fascinating. And many of you know, I think we mentioned it in some of our earlier podcasts, that I am a visionary energy artist. And the art that I do, I have some photos, and we'll show you in another episode, of the multidimensional aspects of this art. And I know how healing it is and how powerful it is and how people stand in front of it. And they know, just standing in front of it, what it was designed for. I was at a show in, oh gosh, it was out on the East Coast, I think in the Maryland area. And it was a medical conference. It wasn't a woo-woo spirituality conference. It was a straight ahead medical conference. And this woman came in my booth and stood in front of the forgiveness angel and started sobbing and said, why am I crying? I said, is there something you need to forgive? And she said, yes, myself. My mother just died recently. I think she had committed suicide. And if I had gotten home just, a few minutes earlier, it wouldn't have happened. She had no idea. So that's like entanglement. The energy of the piece of art entangled into her emotional system and brought out all of that emotion. And I just looked at the clock and it said 4:44, which is angels surround you. You can't make this stuff up, right, Leslie?
No.
So when I met Lisa and I saw her work, I understood it immediately. And there's some in our listening audience who are going to be like, this isn't that deep of a rabbit hole. I know that, but for others, there will be. And for those of you who it is a rabbit hole, just come with us. It's going to be a fascinating journey. And you're going to definitely want to tune in and hear more about Lisa and her work. And you're going to love her. And she is co-authoring a book called We Are Quantum. So for those of you who are going to want to learn about the quantum entanglement and quantum healing and things like that, the book is going to be, each chapter is going to be a different healer or practitioner, not talking about the science, but giving you concrete examples of how this has worked. So it'll be stories. It'll be things that you can easily understand, kind of like some of the examples we've been giving here today.
Way cool.
So
I'm just realizing Leslie asked a question, which is, why haven't we been more educated about this up until now? And that's a big topic, but I wanted to just make a little bit of a response. And my answer to that question when I hear it is, even if we're not going into territory that's exploring things that might be nefarious, my answer to that question is always follow the money. Which is that the disease care system that we've been talking about is very profitable for the institutions involved. And for somebody to have the ability that we do, I do, of treating and preventing things without all of that, there's a lot of incentive to keep that kind of empowerment from the public. It's getting out, so it's too late. But I think just as a place to start, follow the money is almost always my answer to that. Jenny, you look like you had something important to say.
I was going to answer that question as well.
Okay.
So, we've talked about that already, and we've talked about how this kind of technology has already been suppressed, and it continues to be suppressed. And I think that with technology that we have today, it's harder for things to be suppressed. I think that, one of the big questions of why you weren't really questioning it before, and you don't really look into it. If you hear something, it's like, oh yeah, whatever, because we are inundated with all of this information. We don't know what to believe and what not to believe, and the purpose of that is not so we believe something that's not true, but it's to not believe anything at all. So people can do things without our knowledge, and we don't even question it because, oh, I don't know if that's true or not. I'm just going to carry on. So I did want to also say, for people who are listening that might be going through a little bit of a rabbit hole, a lot of people send energy all the time and they're not really thinking of it in that way. But I'm sure many of our audience has been involved with a prayer circle, or maybe who prays quite regularly. And the intention of that prayer circle is just that, to send an intention of energy and healing to someone specific. Typically, a prayer circle is to surround someone with that loving, healing energy of God, and you're kind of praying to God in that sense. But that's the same thing, and I also wanted to say that even with your own thoughts and intentions, just like a radio wave, like we were talking about the key fob, if you're listening to a radio station and you don't like it, what do? You change the station. And that's exactly what we have the ability to do with our thoughts and our intentions. So when you're sending energy, and it is negative, you can change that quite easily. So that's a really great way, I think, to think about this kind of remote healing, is just really powerfully, intentionally sending loving, healing energy to someone. And we just so happen to have healers that can physically do that with their own love and healing energy. Some are more inclined to do that than others, and some are more tapped in to do that than others, like Lori being a Reiki healer. That's not something that has ever really resonated with me. So not my path, but I do have a lot of these really amazing tools that I can use to do that as well. Right. So, yeah.
I think if we're going to wrap up, I'm feeling to end on a note of empowerment, because I actually just had a bit of an aha myself with this conversation. And that is that one of the ways we can hold this, if we're becoming open to or already open to the reality of who we are as powerful, energetic beings beyond this body, there's so much more that we can tap into for ourselves as well as others, for healing and awareness and sharing these types of energies with the rest of the world that can really, really use them right now.
Mm-hmm.
So whatever your belief system, there's probably some way that we can interpret making the choice to embrace vibrations and thoughts and behaviors that are more uplifting and aligned than not.
So how are you feeling, Leslie?
I'm actually looking forward to listening to our guests next week and actually continuing my journey of having my eyes opened a little bit more. And I think that is what I would invite, all our listeners who are a little bit like me, woo adjacent, to actually just be open to there being things that we don't know, don't understand, that could actually be of benefit. So yeah,
Perfect.
I'm ready for it.
I think to that point, I think whether you call it quantum science or energy work, or maybe love in motion, I think it's proof. I think remote healing is proof that we are all connected beyond time and space. So I would love to say thank you for joining us on another wonderful episode. Thank you to my fabulous co-hosts, and I'm so excited for next week's episode. So please tune in with us, and again, set that attention test it out, become the observer, and test it out in your own realities. And we look forward to seeing you again next week on Women's Wealth and Wellness Unleashed.
Thank you so much for joining us today on Women's Wealth and Wellness Unleashed, where we empower women to take control of the two most important areas of their life, their health and their wealth. If you enjoyed today's episode, be sure to subscribe, leave a review, and share it with another amazing woman who's ready to elevate her wealth and wellness journey. Stay connected with us by heading to our website and joining our Facebook community. All the details can be found in the show notes. Until next time, keep thriving and unleashing your highest potential.